Since our last report, our office, along with appointed auditors for certain audits, completed annual integrated or financial audits of 57 different government agencies with year-ends between July and December 2025. We found that the majority of government agencies had effective financial-related controls, complied with financial-related authorities, and prepared reliable financial statements. However, we did identify concerns at 19 out of 27 school divisions, as well as found the Saskatchewan Distance Learning Corporation still needs better governance controls. We found some school divisions did not properly review and approve bank reconciliations and journal entries, which are key controls needed to properly safeguard public resources and ensure reliable financial reports. Without these controls operating as intended, risk of fraud and error increases. Comparing a school division's financial records to bank statements can help detect common signs of fraud, like unusual withdrawals or payments to unknown vendors. We also found certain school divisions continue using a key financial IT system without sufficiently monitoring the IT service provider. The Saskatchewan Distance Learning Corporation did not document and make public its board meeting minutes during 2025 or provide adequate financial forecasts to its board. Doing so will help ensure the corporation's processes align with good practice and it meets its legislative requirements. This report also includes the results of 5 performance audits. I'm going to highlight 3. First, we audited whether the Saskatchewan Health Authority effectively uses travel nurses and made 7 recommendations to help better monitor costs, workforce impacts, and patient care risks. This audit is Chapter 4 in our report. The Saskatchewan Health Authority uses travel nurses to address staffing shortages. The authority paid 15 nurse staffing agencies over $75 million in 2025. The authority's estimated spending on travel nurses increased by over 4,000% from about $2 million to just over $98 million between 2019 and 2024. In response, the authority worked to reduce its reliance on travel nurses, bringing spending down by $20 million to about $75 million in 2025. However, we found the authority needs to assess how reducing travel nurses' usage affects overtime worked by its own nurse employees. While cutting travel nurse costs does save money up front, increased overtime hours are not only paid at higher rates, but they also raise the risk of staff burnout and potentially offset the spending savings that have been realized on travel nurses. We found the average hours worked by travel nurses in 2026 decreased by 54% from 2024, but overtime hours for the authority's own nurse employees increased by 26%. Without sufficiently analyzing the reduced use of travel nurses and the related impacts on nurse employee overtime, workforce management decisions may be made without adequate information. We also recommended that the authority assess using an internal float pool of its own nurse employees who travel to healthcare facilities across Saskatchewan where needed. We found other provinces like BC and Manitoba implemented this alternative staffing model. Having a float pool of nurses could reduce the reliance on travel nurses while also addressing staffing gaps in a cost-effective manner. In addition, the authority needs to verify completion of criminal record checks for all travel nurses and mandate cultural sensitivity training, as it does for its own nurse staff. Doing so can help support safe and equitable care for all patients, regardless where in Saskatchewan they receive patient care. The audit also identified that the authority maintained a list of travel nurses with known performance issues. For one travel nurse listed in 2023, we found the authority used this nurse again at a facility 2 years later without documenting its rationale for doing so. This increases the risk that the authority staffing decisions negatively impact patient care. Finally, the authority should consistently require timely invoices from travel nurse staffing agencies to reduce reliance on using estimated costs. We found examples where agencies invoiced the authority up to 11 months after services were provided, affecting the accuracy of reported costs to senior management, the board, and the Ministry of Health. The authority's ability to reduce travel nurse usage is directly related to its strategies for recruiting and retaining its own nurse employees. By closely evaluating and monitoring the use of travel nurses, the Saskatchewan Health Authority can make better informed decisions and help ensure quality patient care. The second performance audit I'd like to highlight examines how the Ministry of Environment evaluates environmental assessments. This audit is Chapter 3 in our report and includes 4 recommendations to strengthen the Ministry's processes. Environmental assessments protect Saskatchewan's natural resources and public health by identifying and mitigating potential impacts of proposed developments like irrigation projects and new mines before these projects begin. At January 2026, 13 proposed developments were under review by the Ministry of Environment. The Ministry of Environment reviews environmental assessments submitted by developers with technical input from a multi-agency review panel. The Minister approves the assessments depending on the predicted impacts as required under the Environmental Assessment Act. Approved assessments include terms and conditions, like requiring a water management plan, that intends to address issues identified through the environmental assessment process. The audit found the Ministry needs to consistently track and monitor compliance with environmental assessment terms and conditions set by the Minister. For 9 approved projects tested, we found 11 conditions missing from the Ministry's digital tracking system, increasing the risk the monitoring is not occurring where required. Insufficient monitoring could lead to adverse impacts on the environment or planned mitigation steps not taking place. The Ministry also needs to obtain external expertise to review certain environmental assessments. We found 2 instances where the Ministry did not hire external experts when the review panel did not have the required expertise. Further, the Ministry must inform the public timely about developments requiring environmental assessments. For 8 projects tested, the Ministry did not issue its public notice within the expected timeframe of 3 business days after determining a project was a development. Instead, public notices were completed 1 to 6 months later. Finally, the Ministry of Environment needs to publicly report on key measures of success of its environmental assessment process, such as whether the process is timely or whether it really mitigated negative environmental impacts. We found for 5 projects tested, the environmental assessment process took about 1.5 to 6.5 years to complete. In comparison, the federal government is revising its process to target completing all environmental assessment work within 2 years. Reporting sufficient information publicly about the environmental assessment process makes it easier for the public, as well as project applicants, to determine whether the process sufficiently supports development opportunities and environmental stewardship, and increases transparency. Finally, I'd like to discuss our audit about how we examine the Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency plans for its resources for wildfire response. This is Chapter 5 in our report. We made 11 recommendations to strengthen the agency's planning processes. In recent years, the size, frequency, and the impact of wildfires have grown significantly. During the 2025 wildfire season, 510 wildfires burned 3 million hectares in Saskatchewan and cost the agency $350 million for wildfire response. Effective wildfire response requires having the right personnel, equipment, and supplies at the right time in the right place. We found the Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency needs more robust wildfire resource plans and analysis. This includes capital asset maintenance and replacement plans, targeted recruitment and retention plans for key staff, like aircraft maintenance engineers, and clear identification of resources needed for wildfire response, like helicopters and firefighters. Without strong planning, the agency risks entering each wildfire season without optimal level of resources, resulting in increased costs and reliance on contracted services. For example, through mutual aid agreements, the agency contracted 916 personnel, 12 aircraft, and other resources from outside the province in 2025 to help combat wildfires. This contracted support cost over $26 million. We found contracted personnel cost 2 to 5 times more than the agency firefighters. The agency also needs to analyze the effectiveness of its wildfire resource use, including the timeliness and cost benefit of contractor resources like helicopters and personnel. The agency neither assesses costs or consistently tracks when contractor resources are requested and received. We found it took on average 15 days for contracted personnel, such as firefighters, to arrive and deploy to fires in 2025. Additionally, we found that in 2025, the agency's short-term helicopter contracts averaged $3,400 per hour, which cost about 35% more than in the agency's long-term contracts. This suggests a potential savings of over $500,000 by planning an additional long-term helicopter contract for wildfire response. Agency does not prepare its annual budget based on robust resource plans and include all expected wildfire response costs. Actual variable costs related to wildfire response exceeded the agency's initial budget by more than $70 million in each of the past 3 years, showing budgets do not reasonably reflect the expected costs of wildfire response. We also recommended the agency work with communities identified as having higher wildfire risks to make sure these communities have wildfire preparedness plans. We found that the agency identified 89 northern communities as higher risk, but 21 of those communities did not have completed wildfire preparedness plans. At the end of each wildfire season, the agency has undertaken formal reviews to identify improvements and recommendations result. We recommend the agency formally monitor and report to its board whether those recommendations actually get addressed. Lastly, the Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency should set and monitor an initial attack success measure showing the extent of wildfires kept below 10 hectares in size, as this is a key indicator of wildfire suppression. Escape fires burn more forested area and cost more money. Measuring the success of initial attacks after each wildfire season can help determine whether resource changes are needed to improve future wildfire suppression efforts. The agency had an initial attack success rate of 70% in 2025 compared to 76% in 2024. By basing budgets on robust resource plans, systematically tracking requested and received contractor resources, and evaluating resources actually used, the Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency can make sure it has the necessary resources to manage and mitigate the risks associated with wildfires and improve cost efficiency. Lastly, this report includes the results of 18 follow-up audits. In following up on these audits, we assess the implementation status of past recommendations our office has made, an indicator of whether public sector management is improving and agencies are acting on our recommendations quick enough. 78% of audit recommendations at the various agencies in this report were fully implemented after the initial follow-up, which is about 2 to 3 years after the original audit. For agencies with subsequent follow-ups, audits, 69% of the remaining audit recommendations have been fully implemented. We're pleased to see that government agencies are acting on our recommendations in a timely manner and public sector management is improving. We are very pleased to see that our first follow-up at the Ministry of Highways fully addressed all 4 recommendations we made related to winter maintenance on provincial highways, included updating its terminology on the highway hotline. Also, the Regina Public School Division made sufficient progress on all 7 recommendations we originally made in 2024 to strengthen its pre-kindergarten programming delivery. There is one agency, however, we found further progress has to be made soon. The Water Security Agency has not fully addressed 5 audit recommendations we first made in 2020 about regulating water use. The agency is responsible for monitoring water allocation and usage to ensure a sustainable water supply, and does so by issuing water use licenses for things like municipal water use and irrigation. As of April 2026, the agency issued about 15,000 water use licenses in Saskatchewan. The agency still needs to properly monitor whether water licensees use more water than allocated under their agreements and undertake enforcement when it identifies non-compliant water users. We found just over 100 water users exceeded their water use allocation in 2023 or 24 by enough water to fill 3,600 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Effectively monitoring and taking enforcement action on water use non-compliance, as well as reporting to senior management, is key to ensuring a sustainable water supply for Saskatchewan's current and future generations. In closing, I want to thank my colleagues and my team for their continued commitment to